Chapter 20. Von Rossbach Estancia, Paraguay. Dieter entered the living room, where John half lay on the couch, reading a manual on source codes. A beam of bright sunlight spearing through one of the high clerestory windows to bring out the slight reddish hints in his dark hair. The Austrian dropped a package into the young man's lap. John started as though he'd been asleep and looked from the package to von Rossbach. "What's this?" he asked. "A package," Dieter said, with a slight edge of sarcasm. John snorted. "Thanks," he said, and rose. "I'll be in my room if you want me." Sarah came in just as he was leaving, and he leaned over on his way out to kiss her cheek. Her eyes widened, and she turned to watch him go, then turned back to von Rossbach, her eyebrows raised in inquiry. "Something came in the mail from that girl in Boston," he explained, sitting down in one of the leather chairs, the rest of the mail in his lap. "Ah," Sarah said thoughtfully. She moved slowly into the room. "What girl?" This time, Dieter's brows rose. "He didn't tell you about her?" Trying to keep the hurt out of her expression, Sarah sat next to the big Austrian. No." Her mouth twisted ruefully. "He is 17, and this is a girl, and I am his mother." She sighed. "I guess it's only natural he'd want to keep her to himself." Dieter looked at her sympathetically. "But you're hurt anyway." As far as he could tell, they were unusually close. It was probable that, until now, they'd shared everything. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then she wrinkled her nose at him. "A little, maybe." Then she sighed. "It annoys me that I am, though, because really, I'm pleased that he has someone. It would be nice if she were nearby." She leaned towards him. "Tell me about her." He shrugged his massive shoulders. "There's not much I can tell you," he said. "She's somebody he recruited online to keep an eye out for mysterious doings. Then, when we went to the US, he took her and her team the Terminator's CPU. She's a student at MIT," he added. And clearly, something clicked between them. She said. "I guess I'll have to go to the source." John closed the door to his room, tore open the box that Wendy had sent him, and pulled out her letter. "Hi, sweetie," she'd written. Well, that's flattering, he thought. One kiss. On the other hand, we felt close right off. Evidently, 3 months' separation hadn't altered her feelings, and that was extremely reassuring. He read on. "Some of us went to New York this week to attend the New Day show. That's the show that Ron LaBaine of the New Luddites hosts. It was wonderful. I can't begin to tell you how inspiring I find him. I wish you could have been with us. About 100 of us from MIT went down in buses." 100. John reread that, shocked. 100 MIT students went to the New Luddites show. Those people must be more powerful than he'd thought. The idea shook him. He'd assumed the group would be another flash in the pan, a this year's cause sort of thing. Certainly not the kind of thing that would appeal to really intelligent people. Like Wendy, he thought, troubled. He straightened the folds of her letter and continued reading. I'm more convinced than ever that his brand of intelligent Luddism is the answer to so many of our problems. Pollution, poverty, overpopulation. I have to confess to you, right now, that I took the pledge. John looked up from her letter, frowning. She took the pledge. What the hell did that mean? He didn't think she drank. In case you're wondering just what I've pledged, I feel a little awkward about telling you. I know I should have discussed it with you, though that might be presumptuous of me. And maybe you'll say I was swept away by the enthusiasm of the crowd. But I did take it, and I mean to keep my word. In case you haven't heard of the pledge, it's a promise to have no more than 2 children. If I divorce and remarry, and my second husband hasn't any children, then I'm allowed to have one with him. Though ideally, I would have my tubes tied after I had my second child. The hard truth is, the only way we're going to reduce our population is by making sacrifices like that. And reducing population is step 1. Everything follows from that. Wincing, John lowered the letter and rubbed his brow with his free hand. Oh, Wendy, if only you knew, he thought sadly. Overpopulation was not likely to be a problem in a few years' time. Anyway, I hope you won't be angry with me for going ahead on my own. But I know you're a sensible person, and so I'm trusting you'll understand. On a completely different subject, we also saw some of the sights while we were there, and I got this for you at the Lincoln Center. This is the most amazing sculpture. I'd love for you to see it for yourself. But the video is very good and has a making of section at the end that you'll probably find interesting. Hope to hear from you soon. Love and kisses. John pulled the video out of the mailing box and looked at it. On the cover was a photo of a weird-looking modern sculpture. He wasn't impressed, but then he wasn't a big fan of modern art. The back of the box was filled with not very informative blurbs from other artists and bits culled from critical reviews. But hey, if Wendy was impressed, it must be really something. He was trying, and he knew he was trying, to suppress thoughts of Judgment Day. If there was a Judgment Day. Well, if there was, it would make Wendy's idealistic pledge seem rather foolish. And yet, that she had made it moved him. Still more, that she'd written to him about it. He felt toward her a tenderness now more profound and respectful than he had yet experienced. He wanted to protect her, to shelter her from all harm. At the same time, he admired her faith in the future. He smiled and shook his head. Then he took the tape and inserted it into the VCR and sat back to watch. There was a little explanation at first on how Lincoln Center had decided to erect a statue and had commissioned the late Vladimir Hill to create it. Then there was a segment of film, greatly speeded up, that showed the thing actually moving. Its name was Venus Dancing, and John's jaw dropped as he watched it doing just that. The glittering column seemed to swoop and bend, stretching high and then stooping, the holes in its surface growing and shrinking as it moved. The whole thing seemed alive, and its motion was graceful and very beautiful. Although, despite the pleasure of watching the lovely thing, something niggled. Then the dancing segment ended, and the making of section began. The sculptor, emaciated from his bout with cancer, described the process of creation. He told the interviewer that if he must die young, he had at least created the most unique sculpture in the world before he left. Then there were scenes from the unveiling where an almost unrecognizably healthy Vladimir was shown with a beautiful young woman who was the creator of Hill's new sculpting material, a substance she called IntelliMetal. It took a moment as he watched the smiling, blushing brunette nervously adjusting her glasses. But it was that movement that attracted his attention to her eyes. The shock of recognition took his breath away. "Mom!" he shouted, not moving from where he sat on the bed, but only bellowing louder. "Mom! Dieter! Come here now!" Down in the living room, the two adults looked at each other, then scrambled for the stairs, pulling weapons out of hiding places. "What?" Sarah said, bursting into his room. John pointed at his TV, unable to say anything. He didn't even make his usual crack about mothers who burst into their son's room carrying guns. Dieter and Sarah moved to where they could see what he was pointing at. Sarah sat down, hard on the floor, pressing both hands against her mouth. Frozen on the screen was a face she wasn't likely to forget. How? She thought in horror. She's dead. She's dead. She has to be dead. No one could have survived that explosion, even if they hadn't blown away half her head first. She couldn't have escaped either. It was impossible. And yet, this was Serena Burns, Jordan's former boss, the head of security for Cyberdyne. A new breed of Terminator. Call it an Infiltrator, sent by Skynet. "My God," she said. Then she took a deep breath and looked up at John. "I'm not wrong?" he said, sounding shaky. "I wish," she answered. Dieter offered his hand and she took it. He pulled her to her feet easily. "So there was another one," he said grimly. "Isn't there always?" John asked. "So far," Sarah agreed. She brushed her hands over her hips. "Now we need to find out where it is, and what it's up to." "I'll get in touch with Wendy," John said. "She might know something." Wendy answered on the third ring. "Bob's Brickyard, we lay anything," she said cheerfully. In the background, there was raucous laughter. "Wendy?" John said incredulously. He was calling from his room, lying back on his bed, propped up on some pillows. It was kind of late, and he'd been afraid of waking her. "Guess I had that wrong," he thought. "Oops," she said. Then he heard her talking to whoever was with her. "Hey guys, I need a little privacy here." There was a chorus of protest at that. It sounded like Snog and the gang. He smiled, remembering them. It took a few minutes, but she finally managed to get them to leave. "I'm sorry it took so long," she said breathlessly when she came back. "Good thing this isn't a payphone," he said, letting her hear his smile. They were silent for a while. John couldn't seem to wipe the smile from his face. Even though they didn't speak, he found intense joy just being in contact with her, listening to her breath. In a sense, being with her for the first time in months. "I've missed you," she said at last. "I've missed you too." They fell silent again until Wendy said, "Why did you call? Did you get it?" "Your package, yeah. Actually, that's what I'm calling about. There's something on it that might relate to Skynet," he said quickly, wincing slightly. This was a hell of a way to say thank you. There was a pause, then she said, "Oh." "Yeah. In the making of part of the video, they show this woman who invented the material the statue is made from. We need to find out about her. Where she is, for example." There was silence again, and John frowned. This time, the silence had a very different quality. "Wendy?" "Yeah, Well, I thought you might be calling about the pledge," she said, sounding disappointed. John almost laughed. He'd forgotten about that. But he sensed that it was important to her, even if it was absurd to him. "I will always respect your decision on that. I know it's not something you did lightly. So if you thought I'd be mad or something, I'm not." He waited for her response. "You just don't care," she said at last, sounding disappointed. "That's not true," he assured her. "You care, and I care about what you care about," he finished lamely. He hoped that would settle her down. They needed to get onto a more important subject. She blew out a breath that whistled across the phone lines. "Okay," she said, her voice slightly flat. "What's up with this woman that you want to know about?" "Well," he said, "she should be dead." Uh-huh. She went silent, apparently waiting for more. "We don't think she's entirely human," John ventured. "And what makes you think that?" Wendy asked. "She almost killed my mother, but we killed her instead, and now she's attending parties. You can see why we're concerned." "Yeah, that attending parties thing, that's a real bitch." Her voice still had that flat quality, almost uninterested, and John didn't know what to make of that. You don't sound like you believe me, he ventured. Well, John, I've seen this woman's face, and you're telling me you killed her. Which is freaky enough, by the way. Until you top it by telling me she's this inventor from the unveiling, but that she was dead before the unveiling. What am I supposed to think? You're supposed to think that this is more proof that Skynet is real. He snapped. Now you doubt me? He thought. Now, after all these months. Are you guys still working on the CPU? He asked, playing his ace. She took a deep breath and let it out in a huff. Yeah, she admitted. We're still making some progress too. But this, John, this is like something out of a movie. And real life doesn't have a plot. Oh yeah? Mine does. John held on to his temper. He needed her help, and blowing his stack wasn't going to do him any good. Look, he said firmly, I'd like your help on this. Can I count on you? Wendy was quiet for a while. You really think this woman is from Skynet? She asked, her voice sounding small. I'm convinced of it. John waited, holding his breath. I may know something, she said at last. Give me a few minutes to get my notes together, then get online. I'll email you what I have. Thank you, he said, his voice ardent with relief. He listened to the silence on her end and asked tentatively, You're not mad, are you? No, just kind of creeped out. I'll see you online. Okay. And Wendy? Yeah? I love you, you know? Somehow he sensed a smile. Then he heard it in her voice too. I love you too, she said. Then briskly, Give me 10 minutes. You got it. They said affectionate goodbyes, and he hung up. For a few minutes, he just lay back on his bed, smiling. She loved him. True, it wasn't 100% perfect. She also doubted his sanity. But she's coming through for me anyway. He kept on smiling. Love was really strange. But it was also the best feeling he'd ever had. Okay, Wendy said. I don't know how useful this will be, but to me it seems to tie in with what you want to know. Shoot, John told her. You remember when I told you that Craig Kipfer guy said something that sounded like an order to kill someone? Vaguely. Well, I kept checking into this guy and finally broke through some kind of wall. About the same time he was saying, send her to Antarctica, he was getting reports on someone from Montana. They were more detailed than you'd expect. There was a lot of material about her uncle, for instance. It looked for all the world like they were investigating her for a high-level, top-secret government job. John took her at her word. He'd figured that since Wendy probably saw herself in a top-secret government job one day, she'd look into this sort of thing. And this was about Clea Bennett, he asked. No names were mentioned, Wendy wrote. But Clea Bennett is from Montana, where she was raised by an eccentric uncle, recently deceased. All the particulars match, even if they don't call her by name. So what do you think? I think I'd better look this stuff over. Thanks, Wendy. No prob. I really do want to help, you know? I know. Thanks. I'd better get to work on this. Yeah, she said. See you soon. I wish, John thought. Love you. Love you, she wrote. Then she was gone. He began reading the reports she'd sent, finding them dry but very interesting. They did seem to match the few facts offered on the video. Antarctica, he thought. What are we supposed to do now? They'd gathered in Dieter's study to discuss Wendy's information. The comfortable room was lit by a single lamp, and the light was dim, making the space feel more intimate. The French doors were open, letting in soft breezes laden with the scent of the garden. Dieter was in the big chair behind his desk, feet propped up on a low filing cabinet. John and his mother were in the smaller, more formal chairs in front of him. You're kidding, right? Sarah said. His mother wasn't so much frowning as looking puzzled. I mean, it's not much to go on. Or should I say, not much to go to Antarctica on. John smiled at that. No, but it is the best lead we've got. He tilted his head towards her. So if you were looking for someone and you dug this up, what would you do? Sarah looked down, twisting her mouth wryly. After a beat, she raised her hands in surrender. I'd go to Antarctica. Dieter hadn't said anything when John had presented Wendy's information. John looked over at him and found the Austrian apparently deep in thought. Hey, John said quietly. Big guy. Von Rossbach's narrowed gaze slid towards him. What do you think? John asked. I think I remember hearing, just before I retired, the vaguest hints about the possibility of someone creating a super-secret laboratory on ice. At the time, I thought it was a metaphor. Dieter said. But maybe not. He took his feet off the cabinet. Let me make a few calls, find out what I can about this. Meanwhile, John and I can do some research on what sort of equipment we'll need. Sarah turned to her son and smiled. John glanced at Dieter, who looked away quickly. What? Sarah asked, looking between them. John hesitated. Well, he looked to Dieter for support, but the big man was looking out into the garden. John turned back to his mother and took her hand. Raising her brows at the sentimental gesture, she looked at Dieter too, frowned as he continued to stare out the door. And, her expression turning suspicious, turned back to John. "You're still not 100%, Mom." He took a deep breath. "Not enough to go hiking around Antarctica." He nodded once, looking deeply into her eyes. Sarah frowned, then she let out an exasperated breath and looked away, to find herself confronting Dieter's concerned eyes. "Okay," she said, throwing up her hands. "You're right. I'm not 100%, but..." She pointed at John. "You're too valuable to risk. So where does that leave us?" They both looked at Dieter. He laughed and held up his hands. "Before we decide who is going, let's make sure of our destination." "Sounds reasonable." Sarah rose and crooked her finger at John. "Let's leave our host to it, shall we?" With that, she walked from the room. John followed her out, saying, "You're not mad, are you, Mom?" "No, John, I'm not mad." He was quiet a moment. "You sound mad." "I'm not mad." Dieter smiled. She might not be mad, but she wasn't happy either. While they'd been thrashing out whether Sarah was to go or not, he'd been wondering if he dared call his old friend Jeff Goldberg, his former partner in the sector. "I suppose I might as well," he thought. Sully must have made a report by now, and even if he hadn't, they already knew about my association with the notorious Sarah Connor. Which means that Jeff knows too. He went to the wall and took down a heavily framed painting, setting it to lean against the file cabinet. Then he worked the combination of the safe it had hidden. Removing the valuable papers and other odds and ends inside the surprisingly deep little safe, he opened a tiny, secret compartment with a few deft touches. Inside was a cell phone. In Vienna, Jeff had one just like it. When Dieter had retired, they decided to arrange a private means of communication in the event that either ever had need of the other's aid. At the time, von Rossbach had been thinking that his partner, still active in a very dangerous profession, might need his help. It just went to show you, a backup plan was always a good idea. He placed the phone on his desk and booted up his computer. Once on the internet, he sent off the coded message that would bounce through a few different addresses before it reached Jeff. Then he sat back to wait. It could be a while. An hour and a half later, the phone rang. Dieter snatched it up. "Yes," he said. "I don't even know why I'm talking to you." "It's because, in spite of everything you've heard, you know you can trust me," Dieter said. "If I can trust you, then why does it look like you've gone over to the other side?" Jeff's voice was stressed, not usual. Dieter wondered if, in spite of their precautions, this cell was being monitored. if Jeff was letting this call be monitored. "You know me better than that," von Rossbach said dismissively. "What's the gossip about me?" "Gossip? If it was gossip, I could doubt it. I'm talking about official reports, Dieter." "And what am I supposed to have done in these reports?" "For starters, harboring a wanted fugitive," Goldberg snapped. "When was this?" Careful, Dieter thought. You don't want to antagonize him any further. "You know goddamn well when. You were the one who sent me those sketches of her. Then you said the description didn't match. And of course I believed you, because my good buddy wouldn't lie to me. Next thing I know, you're running around California recruiting for her army." Dieter was silent for a while as he gathered his thoughts. He'd thought he knew what he was going to say, thought he knew how to counter any arguments Jeff might throw at him. But now that the moment was here, he found he couldn't use any of those glib explanations, because most of them were lies. He couldn't do that to a man who had been at his back through most of his dangerous career. He'd already done it too often. Dieter took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I did know it was probably her, but I was intrigued and I wanted to investigate her by myself. Especially when you sent me that recording of a man with my face killing police by the dozen. I was bored here and feeling useless." He shrugged, though his former partner couldn't see it. "Then you sent Grigo, and I felt like I had to defend my turf. It wasn't sensible. And it wasn't professional. But I'd gotten to know her a little by then, and I wanted to know more." Goldberg was silent for a long time. "Go on," he said at last, his voice giving nothing away. Dieter felt relieved. At least he was being given a chance to explain. "One night I went over to her house." He frowned at the memory. "I was bringing a dog for her son. More of a puppy, really." He took a deep breath and forced himself to continue. "Before I knew it, we were under attack by a heavily armed man with my face." "Bullshit," Goldberg snapped. "I wish. God, do I wish you were right." Until this moment, he hadn't realized how much he would give for all that had happened to have been a dream. "But you're not. The face was mine. But this man was no more human than that cell phone you're holding. I saw the body. It had no internal organs, just metal, wire, motherboards, stuff like that. There were sparks flying out of it, and it took me an incredible amount of ammunition to stop the damn thing." "Do you think I'm an idiot?" Goldberg shouted. "What the hell is the matter with you?" Dieter kept silent for a moment. He tightened his mouth and closed his eyes, as if in pain. "Jeff," he said quietly, "I had a whole bunch of lies made up to tell you. I was going to be investigating this thing on my own, trying to find out how far Connor's influence extended. You know me. I'm good at being convincing when I need to be. You'd have believed me before I was finished with you, but you deserved the truth. So I took a chance and I told it to you. Jeff was breathing hard, his breath whistling through the phone. Shit, he muttered. Believe it or not, I know how you feel. Dieter commiserated. Why would I tell you a story like this if it wasn't true? Don't you think I know how all this sounds? Why would I even try if it wasn't true? He stopped talking, waiting for his old partner to work it through. She could have talked you around, Jeff said at last. Connor was a damned attractive woman. His voice was wary, but much less hostile. Yeah, and I'm really susceptible to wild stories and sexy women. That's why I was such a rotten agent. Von Rossbach sneered. Jeff gave a short laugh. No, you were pretty good. I still am. Yeah, well, this is a pretty crazy story, buddy. You know that? Have you seen Sully's report? Sully is undergoing psychiatric evaluation. You know he's one of ours? Why would I ask about his report if I didn't? Yeah, good point. Jeff, Sarah Connor is crazy. Her son is crazy. Sully's crazy, and now I'm crazy? Maybe they've been telling the truth all along. Goldberg gave a kind of hiss. I can't go there, buddy. I just can't. Are you at least willing to think about it? After a rather painful silence, Goldberg said, Yeah, I could do that. Good. I need your help. Jeff barked a laugh. You cocky bastard. You sure you don't want to give me 2 more seconds to mull this over? Yes. Well, what the hell? I figured you wanted something. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking on these phones. Right? You got it, buddy. Von Rossbach waited, wanting his friend to ask. So, what do you want? Jeff said. I'm trying to trace a possible kidnap victim. Whoa. If you're talking about Sarah Connor, she took off on her own. If you're talking about Dr. Silberman, how do you think we know that she took off on her own? Dieter winced. He wanted to tell the truth. But I think I've tried Jeff's patience enough for one evening. What are you talking about? There was a pregnant pause from Vienna. Then Goldberg asked cautiously, You don't know? Sarah Connor is missing again? Dieter asked. Last I heard, she was in an institution. If you don't know where she is and what she's doing, then why are you rounding up recruits for her cause? Jeff challenged. Because I promised her I would, before she disappeared from here. I don't know how much good I've done her. Being chased all over California by the sector didn't help my efforts. But in any case, she's not the person I'm talking about. Oh. Jeff was silent for a moment. So what? Are you a PI now or something? No, just letting my curiosity get the better of me. This woman is named Clea Bennett. She's the inventor of something called IntelliMetal. They made this sculpture in New York out of it. Yeah, Venus Dancing, it's called. It's all the rage. Everyone's pretty excited about it. Nancy wants us to go see it for ourselves, Goldberg said. Clea Bennett has been missing for a little while now, Dieter explained. I have some suspicion that it might have been the US government that snatched her. You sure that suspicion isn't an effect of the people you've been hanging out with? Dieter let out an exasperated sigh. This guy named Craig Kipfer's been getting reports on a woman from Montana. The reports read like Bennett's biography. Kipfer passed an order along, and I quote, "Send her to Antarctica." That jogged a memory for me. Just before I left the sector, there were hints of someone building an important and very secret facility on the ice. Do you know anything about that? Jeff was absolutely silent. Hello, Dieter prompted. Kipfer isn't someone you should have heard about, Goldberg said at last. He's like ultra black ops. As for the research facility, there was more contemplative silence, but Dieter waited it out this time. I can't believe I'm telling you this, but yeah, it's there. We know where it's located, but aside from that, we know very little. The only thing we can be sure of is that they're not doing nuclear testing. For once, the Americans are playing their cards close to their chests. Though to be fair, it's not the kind of place that's easily infiltrated. So, who have you got there? Dieter said blandly. Jeff laughed. None of your business. Even if we did have somebody there, you probably wouldn't know them. So where is this base? Dieter waited. Would his friend come through for him? Jeff had no particular reason to cover for the US government, but at the moment neither did he have a particular reason to help his old partner. You're not going to blow it up, are you? Jeff asked sourly. Von Rossbach laughed in surprise. No, that's not the plan anyway. I might try to rescue this young woman, assuming she's there under duress, of course. Jeff said, I thought you were out of the hero business. Are you going to tell me or not? Dieter asked. Don't make me regret this, Goldberg warned. I won't, I swear, Dieter said, fingers crossed. After all, who knew? It's in West Antarctica. Jeff gave him the coordinates. The base itself is slightly inland. He gave a brief physical description of the place. You could hike there from the coast in 3 days. Thanks, Jeff. Dress warm. Yes, Dad. Give my best to Nancy. You bet. Goldberg paused. Oh, God, Dieter, don't make me regret this. Please. Don't worry. Just don't, okay? You'll get old and grey worrying like that, Dieter teased. I'm just curious, that's all. I like a good puzzle. If you hear from Connor, I won't. Yeah, right. Don't blow anything up, Jeff warned. But that's the fun part. Jeff hissed in exasperation, then laughed. You know, you're right. Dieter laughed too. Bye, buddy. And thanks. I am so going to regret this, Jeff said, sounding more amused than worried. No comment. Bye. Dieter hung up. This American base must be one of Jeff's projects, otherwise he wouldn't have had the information at his fingertips like that. A lucky break, Dieter thought. He'd check with Sarah and John to see how their research on supplies was going. Then he'd see about arranging transportation. Sarah looked up as Dieter appeared in John's doorway. It's amazing how many websites there are dealing with tourism in Antarctica, she said by way of greeting. Apparently going there is really popular. Who knew? Give me Paris any day, John muttered, typing rapidly. Ah, yes, said Dieter. We'll always have Paris. Sarah smiled. I've always wanted to go there, she said. My father said there was something special in the air at Paris. But we could hardly expect them to put Skynet someplace so accessible. Or so pleasant, Dieter agreed. They could at least have put it somewhere temperate, John complained. That's right, his mother said. You've never lived anywhere cold, have you, hon? We'll have to put some antifreeze in your blood. John gave her a look. Thanks, Mom. I knew I could rely on you. What are mothers for? She asked brightly. To justify Mother's Day? John asked. He tapped a final key and the printer began to hum. Sarah punched his arm lightly and turned to von Rossbach. Did you find out anything? There is a top-secret American scientific installation in West Antarctica, he said. About 3 days in from the coast. It's a mostly underground facility with some sham huts on top. John took some papers from the printer and handed them to Dieter, who took them and looked them over. A lot of stuff, he said. I pared it down to the essentials, John said. We're not there for the scenery after all. It's the food that concerns me. We'll need a ton of it. I get the impression you're supposed to eat a pound of butter a day. Cold burns calories, von Rossbach said. He became quiet for a moment. What? Sarah asked, coming into the room and sitting on John's bed. Dieter looked up, his eyes meeting hers. John turned to look at him, and von Rossbach glanced his way. "Why are we doing this?" he asked. "We don't know for sure that this woman is there, or that Skynet is there. We could be running off half-cocked here. And to do what, exactly?" Sarah and John stared at him as if he'd suddenly broken out into a Broadway show tune, then glanced at each other and away. After a moment of chewing her lips, Sarah looked at von Rossbach. "If that thing is there, and we have good reason to think it is, then it's there for Skynet. That's what all of these things are for. The Terminators, whatever Serena Burns was, whatever this thing is, they exist to protect Skynet and or to kill us. It's just a question of who strikes first." "What about the rest of the facility?" Dieter asked. "Our one goal is to destroy this thing and Skynet," she answered. "Nothing else." "So you're talking about a surgical strike," Dieter said. "By preference," Sarah agreed. "But what I'm talking about is whatever we have to do." "Same as ever, big guy," John said. "The goal is always the same, however many times it takes." He sighed and lifted his arms, then dropped them in a full-body shrug. "Hey, at least we get to travel." Dieter was silent for a long time. Abruptly, he rose. "All right," he said. "I'll arrange travel." As he walked towards his study, he thought, "Jeff is going to kill me." "Yes?" The woman's voice was sultry and inviting, a voice designed to tickle and suggest. "I would love to take you out to dinner." "Dieter!" Vera Fillmore exclaimed in delight. "How marvelous to hear from you! Where are you, darling?" "I'd rather not say," he answered carefully. "But, as I said, I'd love to take you out to dinner." "When and where?" she purred. "Tierra del Fuego." Vera laughed out loud. "Ha! Do they even have restaurants there?" "Some very good ones." He picked up a pen and tapped it on the desk. "But I must confess, I need a favor." "Ooh, I knew there'd be a catch," she said, putting a mock pout in her voice. "Maybe I should put a catch in of my own." "Careful, you'll frighten me away." Vera gave a throaty laugh. "What do you want, sweetheart? Not more money, I hope?" "No," he assured her. "But I'd prefer to explain to you face to face." Suddenly, the banter was gone from her voice. "So this is a serious thing?" "Yes," he agreed. "But, always excepting the seas and the weather down there, what I'm asking shouldn't put you or your crew in any personal danger." "I see." Dieter waited, letting her think it over. "Have you ever been to Tierra del Fuego?" Of course not, darling, she said, and laughed. It's not exactly a spa now, is it? There's nowhere else on Earth quite like it, von Rossbach assured her. Sweetie, there's a whole lot of pissholes on this planet that could make the same claim. That doesn't mean I want to go visit them. She gave a deep sigh. All right. Where and when? Ushuaia, he said. It's the capital. 2 weeks from today. I'll be there, she said. This had better be one very good dinner, baby. I'll make sure of it, he promised. Will you be staying at a hotel or... I'll be on my yacht, of course, dear. That's what it's for, to protect me from bad hotels. See you then. She made the smacking sound of a big kiss and hung up. Dieter depressed the receiver button and began dialing the restaurant that the travel agency had recommended. I hope this place lives up to its reputation, he thought. He didn't want to have to make up for bad food.